The hay was warmer than the stone floor of the kitchens, and for that, Maren was grateful. She pressed herself deeper into the corner of the horse stall, pulling the thin blanket, stolen from a laundry pile 3 winters ago, up to her chin. The mare beside her shifted, releasing a warm breath that fogged in the frozen air. Maren had learned years ago that animals gave heat without asking questions, without demanding anything in return. The castle of Valdros had many rooms, hundreds perhaps, but none of them belonged to a kitchen girl with no family name and no coin. So Maren slept where she could. Storage cellars in summer, the stables in winter. Anywhere the housekeeper wouldn't find her and drag her back to the cramped servants' quarters where the older women pinched and the younger ones stole. She was 22 years old, and she had never slept in a bed. Not once. Not even as a child, before the fever took her mother and left her alone in a world that had no use for orphaned girls except as cheap labour. The castle had taken her in at 7, not out of kindness, but because small hands were useful for scrubbing pots and crawling into spaces too tight for adults. 15 years later, nothing had changed. The stable door groaned. Maren's eyes flew open. She pressed herself flat against the wall, heart hammering. No one came to the stables at this hour. The grooms had finished their work hours ago, and the horses were settled for the night. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Not a servant, then. Servants scurried. These steps commanded. A shadow filled the doorway of the stall, and Maren stopped breathing entirely. She knew who he was. Everyone in the kingdom knew who he was. King Caelan of Valdros, the Lycan king. 300 years old, they whispered, built like a mountain and twice as immovable. He had taken the throne from his father a century ago and had ruled with an iron hand ever since. The servants said he could smell fear, that he could hear a lie from across the room, that he had once torn a man apart with his bare hands for threatening his territory. And now he was standing 6 feet from where she huddled in the hay, wearing only a blanket and terror. "I thought I caught a scent," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, rougher. She had only ever seen him from a distance, crossing the great hall, addressing his court, riding out with his guard. Up close he was overwhelming, tall enough that his head nearly brushed the stable's low ceiling. Dark hair pushed back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadowed jaw, eyes that reflected the lamplight like a wolf's. He was looking at her the way one might look at something unexpected, a puzzle, a curiosity. "You're the girl from the kitchens." It wasn't a question. Maren nodded anyway, unable to find her voice. "And you're sleeping in my stable." I... The word came out as a croak. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'll go. I didn't mean to. I'll go." She scrambled to gather her blanket, her few possessions, a carved wooden comb her mother had left her, a stub of candle, a heel of bread she'd saved from dinner. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the comb twice. "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it froze her in place as effectively as a command shouted across a battlefield. She looked up at him, waiting for the blow, the dismissal, the order to leave the castle entirely and never return. Instead, the Lycan king crouched down. It brought him closer to her level, though he still towered over her. This close, she could see the faint silver threading through his dark hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his expression shifted from cold curiosity to something she couldn't name. "How long?" he asked. Maren blinked. "Your Majesty? How long have you been sleeping out here?" She didn't know how to answer that. The truth felt dangerous, But lying to a Lycan was pointless. They always knew. The stables? 4 years? Before that, the cellars? Before that. She trailed off. Before that, she'd slept wherever she could curl up small enough not to be noticed. Something flickered in the king's eyes. His jaw tightened. 4 years, he repeated. In my castle. In my stables. And no one thought to mention this to me. No one knows, Your Majesty. I'm careful. I don't cause trouble. I work hard. The housekeeper has no complaints about my work, I swear it. Please don't send me away. The last words came out in a rush, stripped of any dignity she might have pretended to have. She couldn't afford dignity. Dignity didn't keep you warm. Dignity didn't fill your stomach or give you a roof over your head, however makeshift. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, and Marin's heart plummeted. This was it. She had been discovered, and now she would be cast out. In the dead of winter, with nothing but a threadbare blanket and a wooden comb. She would freeze within days. At least it would be quick. Get up. She obeyed, though her legs trembled. The hay fell away from her dress, patched so many times it was more repair than original fabric, and she stood before him in all her poverty, small, thin, unremarkable in every way. The king looked at her for a long moment, then he shrugged off his cloak. Marin stared as he held it out to her. The fabric was thick wool, lined with fur. It probably cost more than she would earn in 10 years of scrubbing pots. Take it. I can't. You can, and you will. He pushed it into her hands. The weight of it was shocking, warm from his body. Put it on. Numbly, she obeyed. The cloak swallowed her whole, pooling on the stable floor, the fur soft against her frozen cheeks. She had never worn anything so fine. She felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes, if her mother had been a queen instead of a washerwoman. Now. The king's voice was firm, but not unkind. You're coming with me. Marin's blood turned to ice. Your Majesty, please. You're not being punished. He cut her off with a raised hand. You're being moved. The stables are no place for... He stopped. Something crossed his face, there and gone. You'll have a proper room, a proper bed, starting tonight. She couldn't process the words. They didn't make sense. Kings didn't give servant girls rooms. Kings didn't notice servant girls at all, except to use them and discard them. Unless... The realization hit her like a bucket of cold water. Of course. She had heard the stories. The king had needs, like any man, and servant girls were convenient, disposable. No one would miss one if she disappeared into his chambers. She should have known kindness always came with a price. I understand, Your Majesty. Her voice came out flat, dead. She had survived this long by accepting what couldn't be changed. She would survive this too, if he let her. I'll do whatever you require. The king's brow furrowed. For a moment, confusion crossed his features. Then understanding dawned, and his expression darkened into something that looked almost like anger. No. The word was sharp. That's not... He exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed almost human, almost frustrated. I'm not taking you to my bed. Now Marin was completely lost. Then why? He looked at her, really looked at her, not through her the way everyone else did. His eyes were old, centuries old, she remembered, and they held something she had never seen directed at her before. Because, he said quietly, no one who belongs to me sleeps in a stable like an animal. And whether you know it yet or not, Marin of the Kitchens, you belong to me. She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, but he was already turning away, striding toward the stable door with the clear expectation that she would follow. And despite every instinct telling her to run, Marin gathered his cloak around her shoulders and followed the Lycan king into the night. The room he brought her to was larger than the entire servants' quarters. Marin stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to step inside, afraid that if she did, she would wake up back in the stables with hay in her hair and frost on her eyelashes. This had to be a dream, a fever dream perhaps, brought on by the cold, finally seeping into her bones. "It's not a trap," the king said. He had stopped a few paces ahead and turned back to watch her. "You can go in." She forced her feet to move. The floor was polished wood, not stone. Warm beneath her cracked leather shoes. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a pig, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries. There was a wardrobe, a writing desk, a chair with cushions, and a bed. Marin stared at it. 4 posts, a canopy of deep green velvet, blankets piled so thick they looked like clouds, pillows, multiple pillows, more than one person could ever need. "This is yours," the king said, "for as long as you want it." She turned to look at him, certain she had misheard. "Mine?" "Yours." "But I'm—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at her patched dress, and her wind-tangled hair, and her chapped, reddened hands. "I'm no one. I'm a kitchen girl. Kitchen girls don't get rooms like this." "You're not a kitchen girl anymore." The words landed like stones in still water. Marin felt the ripples spreading outward, threatening to pull her under. "I don't understand." The king moved to the fireplace, bracing one arm against the mantel. The flames lit his profile in gold and shadow, and for a moment he looked less like a monster and more like a man carrying a weight too heavy to name. "What do you know about mate bonds?" he asked. Marin's throat tightened. She knew the stories. Everyone did. Lycans had fated mates. One person in all the world meant for them and them alone. When they found that person, they knew instantly. The bond was unbreakable, eternal. "I know they exist," she said carefully. "I know Lycans can sense their mates, through scent or something else. I don't know the details." "Scent," he confirmed, "and something else, something harder to explain." He turned to face her, and his eyes held that strange intensity again. "6 months ago, you carried a tray of wine through the great hall during a council meeting. Do you remember?" She did. She had been terrified the entire time, certain she would trip or spill or somehow draw attention to herself. The housekeeper had chosen her specifically because she was small and quiet and unlikely to be noticed. "I remember. I noticed you." The words hung in the air between them. Marin didn't know what to do with them. "One moment, I was listening to my advisors argue about border disputes," he continued. "And the next, there was nothing in the world but you, your scent, your heartbeat, the way you moved through the room like you were trying to be invisible." His jaw tightened. "I've been looking for you ever since." Marin's legs felt unsteady. She reached for the bedpost to steady herself, then snatched her hand back as if the wood might burn her. "You're saying I'm your mate?" The word was rough, almost reverent. "Yes." She shook her head. This was impossible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Fate didn't reach down into the kitchens and pluck out a nobody with nothing to offer. Fate chose princesses, noble ladies, women with dowries and bloodlines and something, anything, of value. There must be a mistake. "There's no mistake." He said it with absolute certainty. "I know what I sensed. I know what I feel. You are mine, Marin. You have been mine since the moment I first caught your scent. But I'm— She stopped, unsure how to articulate the enormity of her inadequacy. I have nothing. I am nothing. I can't read. I don't know how to dance or make conversation or do any of the things a queen is supposed to do. I've never even slept in a bed. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or anger, though not at her. Those things can be learned, he said quietly, and they don't matter to me. What matters is that you're here, that I've finally found you. Marin pressed her back against the bedpost, needing something solid to anchor her. What do you want from me? It was the question she'd been afraid to ask, the one that had been burning in her chest since he'd draped his cloak over her shoulders. Kindness always came with a price. Always. The king was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I want you to sleep in a warm bed tonight. I want you to eat meals at a table instead of scrounging scraps from the kitchen. I want you to have clothes that fit and shoes that don't let in the cold. He paused. I want you to stop being afraid. Of me. Of everything. I want you to know what it feels like to be safe. Marin's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. She hadn't cried since she was 7 years old, standing alone at her mother's grave. She wouldn't start now. And the mate bond? She asked. What does that require of me? Nothing you don't choose to give. He held her gaze, unflinching. I won't touch you without your permission. I won't claim you until you're ready, if you're ever ready. The bond exists whether we act on it or not. It doesn't compel you to do anything. But it compels you. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Yes. So you'll just wait, indefinitely, for a kitchen girl who doesn't know how to be a queen? I've waited 300 years to find you. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I can wait a little longer. Marin didn't know what to say. She had spent her entire life expecting pain, preparing for it, building walls around herself so that when the blows came, and they always came, they wouldn't destroy her completely. She had no defenses against kindness. There will be talk, she said finally. The servants, the court, they'll say I'm your mistress, that I slept my way into a warm bed. Let them talk. His voice hardened. Anyone who speaks ill of you will answer to me. You can't fight the entire castle. Watch me. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the casual certainty of a man who had never lost a battle in his very long life. Marin looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to reconcile the monster of the stories with the man standing before her. The Lycan king who had torn men apart with his bare hands, who had conquered kingdoms and crushed rebellions and ruled with an iron fist for a century. The same man who had given her his cloak because she was cold, who had promised to wait for her, however long it took, who looked at her like she was something precious instead of something discarded. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Get some sleep. There will be food sent up and a bath drawn. We can talk more tomorrow when you've rested. He was leaving. Just like that. No demands, no conditions, no price extracted for his kindness. Your Majesty? He turned back. Why tonight? She asked. You said you've been looking for me for 6 months. Why did you find me tonight? Something softened in his expression. Because tonight was the coldest night of the year, And I couldn't bear the thought of you freezing to death before I could tell you that you're not alone anymore." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Maren stood in the centre of the room for a long time, wrapped in a king's cloak, staring at a bed she was afraid to touch. Then, slowly, she crossed the room and sat on the edge of the mattress. It was soft, so impossibly soft, like sitting on a cloud, if clouds were real and not just shapes in the sky that poor girls dreamed about while scrubbing pots. She didn't remember lying down, didn't remember pulling the blankets over herself or burying her face in pillows that smelled of lavender and cedar. But when sleep finally came, it was the deepest and most peaceful she had ever known. She woke to sunlight, real sunlight, streaming through windows with actual glass, not the grimy, cracked panes of the servants' quarters or the gaps between stable boards. This light was golden and warm, pooling across the blankets like melted honey. For a long moment, Maren didn't move. She lay perfectly still, convinced that any motion would shatter the illusion and send her tumbling back into reality, back to the cold, back to the hay and the horse breath and the gnawing ache of hunger that had been her constant companion for 15 years. But the bed remained solid beneath her. The blankets stayed warm around her. And when she finally opened her eyes fully, the room was still there. The tapestries, the hearth with its banked coals, the wardrobe that probably held more clothes than she had ever owned in her entire life. It was real, all of it. A knock at the door made her bolt upright, heart hammering. She clutched the blankets to her chest like armor, every muscle tensed for danger. "It's only me." The king's voice, muffled through the wood. "May I come in?" He was asking permission to enter a room in his own castle. Maren didn't know what to do with that. "Yes," she managed. The door opened, and he stepped inside carrying a tray. The smell hit her first. Fresh bread, still steaming, eggs, bacon, something sweet that might have been pastry. Her stomach cramped violently, reminding her that she'd had nothing but a heel of stale bread in the past 2 days. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the writing desk. "The kitchens weren't sure what you liked, so I had them send a bit of everything." A bit of everything. There was enough food on that tray to feed a family of 4. Maren stared at it, frozen between desperate hunger and the certainty that this couldn't possibly be meant for her. "Eat," he said gently, "before it gets cold." She didn't need to be told twice. She was out of the bed and at the desk before she could think better of it, shoving bread into her mouth with both hands. She knew she should eat slowly, properly, the way ladies did. She knew she looked like a starving animal, but she couldn't stop. The food was warm and rich, and there was so much of it, more than she'd ever had at once, and dash. "Slow down." His hand closed over her wrist, not tight, just firm enough to make her pause. "You'll make yourself sick. The food isn't going anywhere." Maren swallowed the half-chewed bread in her mouth and felt her face burn with shame. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I know I shouldn't." "Stop apologizing." He released her wrist and pulled up a chair across from her. "You've been hungry for a long time. I understand. But if you eat too fast, you'll just bring it all back up again. Small bites. Take your time." She nodded, forcing herself to slow down, to chew properly, to breathe between bites. It was harder than it should have been. Every instinct screamed at her to eat as much as possible, as quickly as possible, before someone took it away. The king watched her in silence, not with disgust or judgment, as she might have expected. with something that looked almost like grief. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long since you've had a proper meal?" Marin considered lying, but what was the point? He could probably smell the truth on her anyway. "I don't remember," she admitted. "The kitchen staff eat what's left after the household is fed. Some days there's more, some days there's less. Most days I just go without." His jaw tightened. That muscle jumped again, the one she was beginning to recognize as barely contained fury. "In my castle, under my roof, my people have been starving. Not your people." The words came out before she could stop them. "Just me. The others get enough. I'm just—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Forgotten. You won't be forgotten again." It was a promise. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the hard set of his shoulders. And despite everything, despite the years of learning that promises meant nothing and hope was just another form of cruelty, something in her chest loosened at the words. She ate the rest of the meal in silence, forcing herself to take small bites even when her body screamed for more. When she finally pushed the plate away, her stomach was fuller than it had been in years, almost uncomfortably so. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the food, for the room, for—" She gestured vaguely at everything. "All of it. You don't have to thank me for treating you like a person, Marin." But she did, because no one else ever had. The king stood and moved to the window, looking out over the castle grounds. In the daylight, without the shadows and the lamplight, he seemed less like a monster and more like a man. A tired man, she realized, carrying centuries of weight on shoulders broad enough to bear it, but only just. "I need to hold court today," he said. "There are matters that require my attention, but I wanted to speak with you first." "About what?" He turned to face her. "About what happens next." Marin's hands tightened in her lap. Here it was, the catch, the price for all this kindness. She had known it was coming. She had just allowed herself to forget, for one brief morning, that nothing in this world came free. "I told you last night that I wouldn't force you into anything," he continued. "I meant it. But I also need you to understand what the mate bond means. For both of us. Tell me." He moved back to the chair and sat, bringing himself closer to her level. "For me, it means I will never want anyone else. I will never be able to want anyone else. You are it, Marin, for the rest of my very long life. Whether you accept me or not, that won't change." The weight of those words pressed down on her. Centuries. He was talking about centuries of wanting only her, a kitchen girl with chapped hands and no education and nothing to offer but herself. "And for me?" she asked. "For you, it's different. You're human. The bond doesn't affect you the same way. You can walk away, find someone else, live a normal life if that's what you want." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes. Pain, quickly suppressed. "I would let you go, if you asked. It would kill me, but I would let you go." "Why?" "Because keeping you against your will would be worse than losing you." He held her gaze, unflinching. "I've lived a long time. I've seen what happens when powerful men take what they want without caring about the cost. I won't be that man. Not with you. Not ever." Marin thought about the kitchen, about the stable, about every man who had ever looked at her and seen nothing but an object to be used or ignored. None of them had ever asked what she wanted. None of them had ever given her a choice. "What if I don't know what I want?" she whispered. The king's expression softened. "Then take time to figure it out. I told you. I can wait. The room is yours regardless. The food, the clothes, the safety. Those aren't conditional on your answer. Those are yours because you deserve them, because everyone deserves them. She felt the tears building again, pushed them down, like she always did. You barely know me. I know enough. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I know you're a survivor. I know you've endured things that would have broken someone else. I know you're kind. I've seen the way you sneak scraps to the stable cats when you think no one's watching. And I know you're brave, even if you don't believe it. I'm not brave. You followed a Lycan king into the night with nothing but his cloak and his word. That's braver than most men I've commanded. Maren didn't have an answer for that. She looked down at her hands, still rough and red, despite the warm room and the soft bed. Hands that had scrubbed thousands of pots. Hands that had never held anything beautiful or precious or worth keeping. I want to stay, she said finally. The words came out small, uncertain. I don't know if I can be what you need. I don't know if I can ever be a queen or a mate or whatever it is you're looking for. But I want to try, if you'll let me. The king exhaled slowly. Something in his posture loosened, as if he'd been braced for a blow that never came. That's all I ask, he said. That you try. That you give me a chance to show you who I really am. He rose and extended his hand to her. Starting today, come with me. Maren looked at his hand, large, scarred, capable of terrible violence and unexpected gentleness. Then she placed her fingers in his palm and let him pull her to her feet. His skin was warm. His grip was careful, as if she were something fragile, something worth protecting. Where are we going? She asked. To get you proper clothes, he said. And then I'm going to introduce you to my court, as my intended mate. The terror must have shown on her face, because his expression softened with something that might have been amusement. Don't worry, he said. Anyone who disrespects you will answer to me. And trust me, Maren, no one wants to answer to me. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Maren felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. The great hall fell silent when they entered. Maren had walked through this room 100 times before, carrying trays and scrubbing floors and trying to make herself invisible. She knew every stone, every tapestry, every draught that crept in through the high windows. But she had never walked through the center of it, never felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing down on her like physical force. The king's hand rested on the small of her back, steady, grounding, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She was dressed in green velvet now, a gown that had been altered hastily by the castle seamstress, who had looked at Maren with barely concealed shock when the king himself had escorted her to the fitting. The fabric was soft against her skin. The shoes were leather, supple and warm, nothing like the cracked cast-offs she'd worn for years. She looked like a lady. She felt like a fraud. The court had assembled for the morning session, nobles and advisors and high-ranking Lycans who had served the king for decades or centuries. They watched her approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion to outright hostility. One woman in particular caught Maren's attention. Beautiful, with sharp features and sharper eyes, dressed in silk the colour of blood. She stood near the front of the crowd, and her gaze followed Maren like a predator tracking wounded prey. That's Lady Alara, the king murmured, low enough that only she could hear. She's been trying to become my queen for the past 50 years. Don't let her intimidate you. 50 years. Maren couldn't even imagine wanting something for 50 years. She could barely imagine wanting something for 50 minutes without having it taken away. They reached the raised dais at the front of the hall. The king guided her to stand beside his throne, then turned to face the assembled court. "I have an announcement," he said. His voice carried effortlessly, filling the vast space without seeming to shout. This was a man accustomed to being heard, accustomed to being obeyed. "Many of you have wondered why I've never taken a queen, why I've refused every match proposed by every noble house in the kingdom." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "The answer is simple. I was waiting for my true mate." A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers rose and fell like wind through leaves. "Last night, I found her." The king turned to look at Maren, and his expression softened in a way that made her breath catch. "This is Maren. She is my fated mate, and she will be treated with the same respect you show me. Anyone who fails to do so will answer for it personally." The whispers grew louder. Maren caught fragments. "Kitchen girl, nobody, impossible, surely not," and felt her face burn with shame. They knew. Of course they knew. Servants talked, and gossip spread faster than fire in a castle this size. By now, everyone would know exactly where she had come from, and exactly how far beneath them she was. "Your Majesty." Lady Alara stepped forward, her voice silk over steel. "Surely you don't mean to suggest that this girl is fit to be our queen?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The king's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Something dangerous. "I'm suggesting nothing, Lady Alara. I'm stating a fact. Maren is my mate. That is not up for debate." "But she's a servant." Ilara's lip curled with delicate disdain. "A kitchen girl. She has no breeding, no education, no— She has my heart." The words cut through the hall like a blade. "That is all the qualification she needs." Maren's chest tightened. He meant it. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the rigid line of his shoulders. He was defending her, a nobody, a nothing, in front of his entire court, risking their respect, risking their loyalty. For her. Lady Alara's composure cracked, just for a moment. Fury blazed in her eyes before she smoothed it away behind a polished smile. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect. I was simply surprised." "I'm sure you were." The king's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "Now, if there are no other objections, we have business to attend to." The court session proceeded, but Maren barely heard any of it. She stood beside the throne like a statue, painfully aware of every glance cast her way. Some were merely curious, others were calculating, and a few, Lady Alara's among them, were openly hostile. When the session finally ended and the court began to disperse, Maren felt like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Her legs ached from standing still. Her face hurt from trying to maintain a neutral expression. Every muscle in her body screamed for escape. "You did well." She turned to find the king watching her. His expression was unreadable, but there was warmth in his eyes. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just stood there." "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." He offered his arm. "Come, I'll show you the gardens. You look like you need air." She did need air. She needed to breathe something that wasn't thick with judgment and hostility, and the cloying perfume of nobles who had never worked a day in their lives. The gardens were beautiful, even in winter. Bare branches traced delicate patterns against the grey sky, and the paths were lined with stones that glittered with frost. They walked in silence for a while, Maren trying to unknot the tension in her shoulders. "They hate me," she said finally. "They don't know you. They hate what you represent." "What's that?" "Change." He stopped beside a frozen fountain, looking out at the stark landscape. They've had decades to position themselves, to build alliances, to scheme for power. And then you appear, out of nowhere, with no connections, no debts, no allegiances, and suddenly all their plans are worthless. Maren wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't ask for this." "I know." He turned to face her. "And I'm sorry that my world is so cruel. But I want you to understand something, Maren. Their hatred isn't about you. It's about them. About their fear and their ambition and their petty jealousies. You've done nothing wrong." "Lady Alara wants to destroy me." "Lady Alara can try." A cold smile crossed his face. "She won't succeed." Maren looked up at him, this ancient, powerful king who had chosen her out of everyone in the world. Why me? Truly, there must be thousands of women who would be better suited. Women who know how to navigate courts and politics. Women who wouldn't embarrass you. "You could never embarrass me." "You don't know that." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpectedly tender, that Maren felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "that I have spent 3 centuries searching for something I couldn't name, something that was missing. And the moment I caught your scent in that great hall, I knew I had found it. You, Maren, just you, exactly as you are." She didn't know what to say. She had never been enough for anyone, had spent her entire life being overlooked, undervalued, discarded like refuse. And now this man, this king, was telling her she was exactly what he wanted. "I don't know how to be what you see in me," she whispered. "You already are." He cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. "You just don't believe it yet. But you will. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if I have to." And then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, careful, a question rather than a demand. Maren felt it all the way to her bones, warmth spreading through her despite the winter cold. Her hands found his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with something fierce and tender and absolutely certain. "Mine," he said. "You're mine, Maren, and I'm yours. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She should have been afraid. The court hated her. Lady Alara was already scheming. She had no allies, no experience, no idea how to survive in this world of power and politics. But standing in the frozen garden with the Lycan king's hands on her face and his warmth surrounding her, Maren felt something she had never felt before. She felt like she belonged. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on the first day of spring. Maren stood before a mirror in the Queen's chambers, her chambers now, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The gown was white silk, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured starlight. Her hair had been pinned up with pearl combs, a few soft curls left to frame her face. She looked like a queen. She still felt like a kitchen girl. "You're stunning," Kaelin said from the doorway. She turned to find him watching her with that expression she was beginning to know, the one that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. He was dressed in black, formal and severe, but his eyes were warm. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," she said. "Isn't that bad luck?" I've never believed in luck. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. I believe in fate, and fate brought me you. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks since he'd found her in the stables, shivering and hungry, and certain that kindness was just another trap. 3 weeks since he'd wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and changed her life forever. In that time she had learned to read, haltingly still, but improving every day. She had learned which fork to use at dinner and how to curtsy without falling over. She had learned the names of every noble in the court and which ones could be trusted. The answer to that last one was almost none of them, but she had also learned other things. The way Kaelin's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the sound of his heartbeat when she pressed her ear to his chest, the fierce protectiveness that rose in him whenever anyone looked at her wrong, which was often. Lady Alara had tried, of course, whispered campaigns and subtle sabotage. Rumours spread through the castle like poison, painting Maren as a fortune hunter, a manipulator, a witch who had ensorcelled the king. But Kaelin had handled each attack with cold precision, and one by one, Lady Alara's allies had begun to distance themselves. This morning, Maren had learned that Lady Alara had left the castle entirely, retreated to her family's estate in the Northern Territories, officially to recover from an illness. Everyone knew the truth. She had lost, and she couldn't bear to watch Maren's victory. "Are you ready?" Kaelin asked. Maren took a deep breath. "No, but I don't think I ever will be, so we might as well do it now." He laughed, that rare, genuine laugh she had come to treasure, and offered her his arm. "That's my queen." The ceremony was held in the Great Hall, the same room where Kaelin had announced her as his mate 3 weeks before. But today, the space had been transformed. Flowers everywhere, despite the season. Hothouse blooms in every colour, filling the air with sweetness. Candles burning in every alcove. And people. So many people, filling every inch of available space. All of them watching as Maren walked down the aisle on the arm of the Lycan king. She kept her eyes on his face. Only his face. If she looked at the crowd, she would lose her nerve. She would remember that she was nobody, nothing, a kitchen girl playing dress-up in a queen's gown. But when she looked at Kaelin, she saw only love, only certainty, only the unshakable conviction that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The vows were traditional, ancient words that had bound Lycan kings to their queens for millennia. Maren spoke them in a voice that only trembled a little. Kaelin spoke them like a man making a sacred promise, each word heavy with meaning. And then it was done. They were married, mated, bound together for the rest of their lives. Kaelin kissed her in front of the entire court, and Maren forgot to be self-conscious, forgot the watching eyes and the whispered judgments and the weight of a crown she wasn't sure she could carry. There was only him, only this, only the impossible, overwhelming reality that she was loved. The feast that followed was a blur of faces and congratulations, and more food than Maren had ever seen in one place. She sat beside Kaelin at the high table, wearing a crown now, a delicate circlet of silver and sapphires, and tried to remember how to breathe. "You're thinking too hard," Kaelin murmured, leaning close. "I can practically hear it." "I'm thinking about how strange this is," she admitted. "A month ago, I was sleeping in the stable. Now I'm queen. Does it feel wrong?" She considered the question. The crown was heavy on her head. The gown was stiff and formal. The court was full of people who still resented her, even if they didn't dare show it. but Kalen's hand was warm on hers. His shoulder was solid beside her. And when she looked at him, she saw home. "No," she said. "It feels exactly right." Later that night, in the privacy of their chambers, Kalen held her close and whispered promises against her skin. He told her she was beautiful, told her she was strong, told her he would spend every day of his very long life making sure she knew how much she was worth. Maren fell asleep in his arms, in a bed softer than clouds, wrapped in warmth and safety and love. She dreamed of spring. 1 year later, Maren stood on the balcony of the Queen's chambers, watching the sun set over the kingdom. Her kingdom now, as much as his. The people had grown to love her, the common folk especially, who saw in her one of their own, risen to greatness. She had used her position to improve conditions for the servants, to ensure no one in the castle went hungry or cold. No child would ever sleep in a stable on her watch. Kalen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into his warmth, feeling his chin rest on top of her head. "You're brooding," he said. "I'm reflecting. There's a difference." And what are you reflecting on?" She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to love more than anything in the world. "I was thinking about the night you found me, how scared I was, how certain I was that kindness was just another kind of cruelty. And now I know better." She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. "Now I know what it feels like to be treasured." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that was hers alone. "You'll never sleep in a stable again, Maren. You'll never go hungry. You'll never be forgotten or overlooked or treated as less than you deserve." I swore it then, and I swear it now, for as long as I live. "That's a very long time." "I know." His eyes gleamed with warmth and mischief and endless love. "You'll just have to put up with me." Maren laughed and pulled him down for another kiss. She had spent 22 years surviving, learning to expect nothing, need no one, want nothing she couldn't live without. She had built walls around her heart so thick she'd thought nothing could ever break through. But the Lycan king had found her anyway, had seen her, truly seen her, when everyone else looked right through her, had loved her, not despite what she was, but because of it. She was no longer a kitchen girl sleeping in the stables to stay warm. She was a queen, a wife, a woman who had found her place in the world, and she was exactly where she belonged.